There are many different types of roles you can take on in your relationships with your team members to produce results. Supervisor, teacher, manager, mentor, coach, leader. Now, a lot of these terms are used in different ways by different people and different organizations. So please don't take the definitions we're going to use as the right definitions of the word. It's just the way we use them at Stillwater. We're going to talk about how these roles are different from each other, what skills you need for them, when is the best time to use which role, and how we need to change our style as we grow in our careers. When most people are hired for their first job, they take on the role of an individual contributor, and the first thing they need to do is develop task expertise. If you excel at your job, then you might be promoted from your group of peers and be given a supervisory role. A supervisor's job is to tell team members what to do and check that they're doing it. A sales supervisor, for example, might call their team members every day to check what their progress is on their targets and to give further instructions. The skill you need to develop at this level is finding a way to achieve both task focus and people focus simultaneously. Most supervisors end up being too task focused or too people focused. If you're task-focused supervisor and one of your team members is struggling, you might find yourself getting frustrated with what you feel are excuses and telling them just do it. Or you might feel that there's not enough time to explain and that with your task expertise, it's going to be faster to just jump in and do it yourself. And this may be required in some real emergency, but if you're doing this too frequently, it's going to be counterproductive. It's like a parent jumping in to do the homework for the kid instead of teaching the kid how to do it. If on the other side, you're overly worried about being liked, then you might end up buying the excuses of your team members and either telling them not to worry about it or diving in to do all the work yourself. And most supervisors spend their time figuring out where to place themselves on this axis and what compromises to make. But the best supervisors are the ones who realize that task and people actually exist on separate axes. There are some supervisors who don't care about either, and they don't survive too long in high-performance cultures. But the best bosses are the ones who say you can do it and you will do it. The task is important and your development is important. So we'll sit down and have a conversation to figure it out. But I'm not going to have you question your abilities. I'm going to push you so that you achieve your objectives. And in fact, they don't see people as a resource through which they can achieve their own personal results. They see the tasks as a mechanism through which they can build people. And so a good supervisor quickly moves up the ladder to incorporate the teacher role in their relationships with their team. You can only do this if you've motivated your team enough so that they don't need to be constantly watched. In the teacher role, you're transferring theory and knowledge. And the skill you need to display at this level is the ability to explain best practice simply and persuasively. You're not telling your team members what to do and monitoring them, but instead explaining the best way to do some things so that they can do it themselves. In a professional services firm, for example, instead of checking the spreadsheets of your team members, you might teach them a stepwise process through which they can audit their own work. Now, there's also a limitation to how much you can achieve when you act as a teacher. When you're explaining to your team members the right way to do something, you're not empowering them to do it in new, possibly even better ways. Or perhaps you're not giving them space to do it in a way that works best for them, to use their own strengths and working style. You've got to check that the systems you've asked them to follow are actually helpful to them and practically implementable. Do they feel the systems are there to help them achieve their targets or to help you monitor and control them? Because there's a huge potential downside to over-prescriptive teaching. If you explain to your team member that in order to achieve an outcome, they should do A and B and C, and then they don't achieve that result, they might simply say, oh, I did what you told me. And what they're implying is, this is not my result, this is your result. So in order for you to produce better results so you can contribute more to the organization and rise further in your career, you need to create a culture in which your team members feel a sense of ownership and accountability for the outcomes they produce. But they can only be held accountable for results if they are the ones making decisions that influence the outcome. And that means you also start taking on the risk of them not doing it the way that you would have done it if you were making all the decisions. So if you want to grow, you gotta let go. Now, you can only move to the manager role if your team members have a certain amount of process mindset and an ethical long-term view, and if the rewards and recognition are based on metrics that support this. Otherwise, they might break systems to achieve personal short-term targets. The tasks you're delegating as a manager are much more complex than when you're a supervisor. And because you're not monitoring them the entire time, the skill you need as a manager is rigorous communication. The ability to make your expectations very clear, to translate them into unambiguous commitments, to manage those agreements and hold people accountable to them. The next step up from a manager is taking on the role of a mentor. Here, you let your team members almost decide their own goals and approach. But you can only do this when you feel they've reached the required level of motivation, integrity, skill level, process orientation, and results focus. They will do the best they can do to achieve the result, but in some complex projects or assignments, they might make some mistakes because they don't have as much experience as you do. And that's where mentoring comes in. So if teaching is about sharing theory, then mentoring is about sharing experience. Your role as a mentor is to speed up their development and improve their performance by sharing some of your own learnings and offering suggestions. But by and large, you let them make their own decision so they still have ownership of the outcome. As a teacher, you're telling them, this is what you should do. And as a mentor, you're telling them, this is something that worked for me, it's one of the things you could do. And you give them the freedom on how they want to proceed because the project is their baby. Now, an even higher level of empowerment is moving up from the role of a mentor and taking on the role of a coach. When you're acting from this role, you don't even share your own suggestions or experience because that might feel intrusive and cramp their style. Now, of course, you only take on the role of a coach when your team members have a lot of rich experience themselves. A CEO, for example, might have much less functional knowledge than some of the directors reporting to him or her. IT, sales, marketing, HR, etc. The key skill at this level is asking excellent questions that provoke thinking. A CEO of a firm might ask the head of R&D what new technologies he or she feels their division needs to develop, what budget would be required, and what are the complexities and challenges they will need to overcome. As a coach, your job is to be a sounding board to ask questions to help your team members think through the approach more rigorously and then give them feedback. Now, of course, you do need to make sure they're aligned with the other members of the team and overall strategy, but a coach role is the one with the highest levels of empowerment. And this is not to say that a coach role is better than a supervisor role, or vice versa. Which role you take on in a conversation depends on the situation and team member you're dealing with. Now, if you give complete freedom to someone with no skill or motivation or integrity, you're going to have problems. And if you micromanage a motivated, skilled, experienced team member, you're going to constrain and demotivate them. So you got to figure out which role is appropriate when. But there is a chicken and egg sort of problem here. You will be unwilling to trust team members until they display a high levels of performance, and they will not have the space to show a higher level of performance till you give them more trust. So that's where the role of a team leader comes in. Leadership is showing up in a way that inspires trust and credibility in your team members so that they want to do their best and do it with integrity. If someone in your team is not stepping up when you step back, well, the uncomfortable leadership question we've got to ask ourselves is, what is it about the way that I am showing up that is contributing to that? Leadership is the relationship that will fuel the growth of your team members and allow you to move up this pyramid. We've got an entire course to cover the principles of leadership, so we won't cover them in this video. But what we've found in our work with leaders at different levels is that when they start in people management, they spend a greater percentage of their time in roles at the bottom of the pyramid, and as they move up in their careers, they spend a greater percentage of time at the top of the pyramid. So here's the question we've been building towards for this lesson. What percentage of time are you spending at each of these roles at this moment? How do you feel the relative proportions need to change, if at all, for you to move to the next level in terms of building people and producing results? And what actions would you need to take specifically to make that happen?